My name is Miriam Melwich. I chair Young Labour, and I'm going to be chairing the conversation with Mike. I'm really excited to be getting started. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to OpenAid for having us as well. As a Jewish Labour movement, we're really keen to brief party members about the forthcoming EHRC investigation into Labour anti-Semitism, and the JLM has been delivering briefings across the movement. And we want to let you know about what to expect from the report, what the process is, and what's going to be coming next. So before I introduce Mike, I also want to do a quick plug for the JLM. Please join the JLM if you're not already a member. You can join as an ally if you're not a member of the Jewish community, or you can join obviously if you're a member of the Jewish community as well. And we want to hear your questions as well. So please feel free to drop your questions into the chat section or into the question section, but please keep on mute if you can for the beginning, if that's all right, just so we don't have too much feedback on the line. So the JLM is Labour's oldest affiliate, and hopefully we want to be a bit more of a boring social society, to be honest, after this. But at the moment, yeah, we're doing a whole spectrum of events. We're doing lots of different things, and I know Rebecca Filer is on the line with us as well, who is the organiser for the JLM as well. So I'm sure she'll be able to tell you more about that. So I'm going to kick off now and introduce Mike Katz. Mike Katz has done a phenomenal job as the chair of the Jewish Labour movement in a very, very challenging period. Mike was also our Labour candidate in Hendon, our PPC, in 2017, and a London Assembly candidate in 2016 as well. And he's going to be chatting to us about the EHRC report and what we're going to expect from it. So I'm going to kick off with the first question from Mike, if that's all right.
Right.
So Mike, how did we get here? Why is the EHRC investigating anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? And why did the JLM refer the Labour Party to the EHRC?
Wow, simple one. How did we get here? Well, luckily the commute was easy for me. I suppose, you know, I saw Henry, I think, a comment up in the chat that popped up saying, I don't think the JLM could ever be boring. And I remember the days when JLM was quite pedestrian, I'll put it that way, or rather no different from any other socialist society. We're certainly one of the first. We're affiliated to the party 100 years ago this year. Thanks to this awful pandemic, we are postponing all our celebrations and commemorative events until next year. So there's still lots of time for people to join and get involved. I'll be plugging away as we go on. But, you know, the fact is that we came pretty close last year to disaffiliating, and the membership were kind of close to disaffiliating. And if you think about some founding affiliate of the Labour Party that has been part of the conversation of left-wing politics in this country, and actually equally part of the conversation of a large chunk of the Jewish community for the past 100 years and more, we're hopefully coming out of a shameful period in our history. The party which many of us joined because we wanted to fight racism, as one of the principal reasons for joining the Labour Party, and should be a natural home for minorities, became a very, very, very difficult space, a very unwelcoming space for one minority in particular. And the party which should have been the vanguard of fighting racism was the root of the trouble. So how did we get here? I mean, I think let's start in the obvious place. In 2015, we saw a change in the numbers of people joining the Labour Party as a result of the leadership election. And as part of that, it's fair to say that from our perspective, we saw a change in culture and behaviour, and a correlation between the increased membership and different behaviours from what we've seen before amongst members. Then, spool forward, 2016, we saw some more candidates with problematic backgrounds, history of saying difficult things or acting in troubling ways, things they'd said on social media, or indeed their actions, weren't consistent in what we thought were Labour values. And the Labour Party, when that was happening, you can say from Ken Livingstone onwards, if you want, should have been to set terms and boundaries for appropriate behaviour very, very firmly, and they really, and Livingston is I suppose, as you know, an exemplar, an archetype, but by no means out of the ordinary in terms of the way the party responded, which was not to do what they should have done. And that sort of began 4 years of really, really difficult time for Jewish Labour Party members, some of whom aren't Jewish, aren't Labour Party members anymore. We have always, in a way, sadly, increased our membership when there's been a significant lack of action or milestone passed in the party's failure to tackle anti-Semitism. And this continues to be the case. We have grown to more than 4,000 members, both full members, lots of youth and student members, which is really pleasing to see political activism kind of being energized amongst young Jewish progressives, and also people who want to join in support. But a lot of that, and certainly in the early days, was around people kind of wanting to stay members of JLM to show support. Often they were Jewish, and often they felt they couldn't live with the party anymore, but they wanted to stay in contact with the wider movement. And so that's what a socialist society is for in many ways. But it was sad that they felt, obviously tragic, they felt they had to leave the party to achieve that. There was, the Royal report into the Oxford University Labour Club activities showed some kind of early signs of some serious criticisms, serious circumstances rather, around casual anti-Semitism. This then in turn led to the Chakrabarti report, which had some content that we welcomed at the time, but really wasn't followed through and was just left as a, well, it was left to not be fully implemented, and secondly, it was fatally undermined when I don't exaggerate, but it feels to me like a matter of days, if not weeks, after its publication, Shami Chakrabarti, previously unpolitically aligned for a long career in leading Liberty, becomes made a baroness and put in the shadow front bench. And that felt very crude and transactional, and certainly the community felt it was very crude and transactional. I guess the turning point came in 2018. We'd always at JLM tried to operate in good faith, be honest brokers, and advocate for Jewish members in the party, but actually also advancing the party, cause the Labour Party in the Jewish community. I stood, as Miriam said, in Hendon, the second most Jewish seat, to use that shorthand, in the country. We came in all the Barnet seats, we came really close, and I came within about 1,000 votes of winning. And it wasn't for want of kind of being active campaigners. We did so much activity for a relatively small organisation in that general election to support candidates in seats. Mostly I'd follow the structure in seats we were trying to retain. And it felt that for that willing engagement, we were just getting knocked back. We were getting othered, we were getting gaslit, we were just being used by the party leadership, by the staff in Southside. I guess a real turning point was around the Mears One mural, which I hope people are kind of familiar with, in terms of the controversy. And it was just about the time of Passover in 2018, Easter 2018, when there was some direct, some very, very, direct involvement of the leader of the party in backing a mural, which seemed to kind of be perfect in combining both new anti-Semitism with some kind of new left anti-Semitism with some very old-fashioned, old-style, classic, from the right tropes of anti-Semitism in terms of power of control of media and capital. And there was a massive demonstration reaction by the Jewish community. The first time this had happened, assembling on Parliament Square a few days afterwards. I should add, 4 days the party leadership had tried to get an apology right and couldn't find the words or the conviction or the just the sincerity to do it properly. And they have 4 days and 4 goes, and it just in a way got worse after that. And what do we see in the wake of that big Enough is Enough demonstration? We see the MPs who turned up to support the Jewish community being monstered online and at their meetings by parts of the party members who thought that they were just there there to kind of wield a political weapon. And obviously that's tied in with other actions the PLP took. And without speaking to those directly, it was, you know, it was kind of cemented in, absolutely baked in the kind of denialist agenda that many people up until and indeed after the general election still want to pursue, in terms of there's no anti-Semitism, it's not a problem, or indeed a slight variant is it's 0.0001%, whatever figure that has been trotted out, and so ergo it's not really worth worrying about. And actually the complaints are all around weaponizing this sort of racism to attack the leadership, which inter alia is something we've always said no other minority would or should have put up with, but actually wouldn't be put in the position of having to put up with it by the Labour Party. So that felt very strongly, you know, very personal. We sat down with Jenny Formby, mid-18, to talk through some positive actions. Didn't really come to anything. 19 action points we agreed in a 3-hour-long meeting. None of them really happened. And increasingly we were shut out, we were closed down. We realised there was no way to actually get the party to change its behaviour from working within. And so there were two options. We either split or we use a regulatory device to make an intervention. And we went down, members didn't want to split. They made some very, very strong comments about what they thought about their confidence in Jeremy Corbyn and the rest of the leadership at our annual meeting. But nonetheless, they made it clear that they, you know, they were still wanting to continue to fight the fight. And so we thought, what's left? There's an equalities regulator that Labour set up called the HRC. We'll make a referral. And that sort of, and that's kind of a very crash course of how we actually got to this point. And it has always been more in sorrow than in anger that we've reached this point. And you could almost, you know, I think maybe over the course of history, you might see it as a caring intervention, say, look, the party's gone wrong here. This is a party that should be under law, just behaving as it should do under law, making an assumption that the HRC is going to say the sort of things that we'll explore later on in this session. But even so, you know, despite all, you know, what the rhetoric about, you know, this being, you know, the party being a party of anti-racism, yeah, it's breaking the law, let alone actually behaving to the highest values that it seeks to uphold and live by. And so that's why we got to the point of making the referral in September 18. And, you know, and obviously it's a big exercise. It's taken a while to get there. We've had another general election in the interim, as well as a lot of other activity, which I'm sure we'll cover. But, you know, suffice it to say, we think it's going to be a significant moment in the part of the party. We think its findings are going to be significant, and with any luck, it will put us on a better course for the future.
Definitely, it's absolutely heartbreaking that we've reached this last resort after trying to engage after such a long time, and that for so many members, our lived experiences of facing racism in the movement we love and the cause that we desperately care about. Mike, can I ask what the report is looking into, and what kind of evidence the HRC has been collecting and looking at?
Yeah, absolutely, Miriam. So I mean, look, to be clear, the HRC comes out of the Equalities Act 2006. It's kind of, you know, that was the legislation kind of combined all the different equalities legislation that previously existed and put it into one corpus of law, and established the HRC as the kind of single regulator for equalities activities. So, you know, let's be clear, talk brass tacks. This report will not give a definitive answer to the kind of basically the political question: was the Labour Party anti-Semitic? That's a political question. History has to judge that. You know, this is equalities law is being investigated here. The terms of reference are clear. So they're investigating discrimination. Were there unlawful acts committed to Jewish members of the Labour Party in terms of discrimination in the way they were treated in a number of different ways? So that is the basis of it. You know, if you look at other HRC reports, they will talk about culture and they will talk about process. They'll talk about the way that rules are applied. They will talk about the impact on people in terms of where law has been breached. But it isn't, we have to answer our own political questions about why this came about and the values that I referred to earlier. What is really clear is that this is talking about, has the party discriminated against Jewish members? It may or may not make reference to individuals, members of staff, or indeed elected representatives. It may or may not use phrases that it's used in the past around institutional racism, or it may find as a body they are very clear about the way they communicate. We found looking through their previous output, and we think they will try and be as transparent and open about what it is, because what's happened, because this is the only other time a report of this nature, an inquiry of this nature, has been undertaken is with the Met Police. They investigated the British National Party, but actually the investigation wasn't of such a high caliber and carry the same sorts of kind of legal set of legal references and potential set of consequences for that organisation. It didn't get that far.
Thanks, Mike. On that note, do we know how the report will be structured, or do we have an idea of what it might say?
Who knows? in terms of content, the overall structure, it will have an executive summary. It will talk about the evidence that has been submitted by ourselves and indeed other organisations. It will talk about the way that it went about its job, and then it will and if it finds there have been unlawful acts of discrimination, then it will talk about an improvement notice. There will be it will ask the party, recommend the party should do X, Y, and Z. And actually, the reason that we've made the kind of referral that we have under Section 20, that means that rather than just saying, well, you could do this or you could do that, the recommendations that are going to be coming out, are going to have legal force. And it's not, it's nice to hear all the leadership candidates in the leadership election saying they'll implement the HRC report. They don't have much choice about it. Is the blunt truth, and and this shows the nature of the referral. And actually, many people. Hello. Well, we've got some. Could everybody mute, please? Thank you. For lots of human rights lawyers that we've talked to, and then we kind of have the Labour Party being a party of lawyers, there's always about 3 opinions for every lawyer. But people say actually getting the referral, the HRC making the referral, is in and of itself, it demonstrates the seriousness of the issue, and the HRC feeling that they needed to act. There has been an element by which some people who want to run from this say, well, it's kind of a bit of a vexatious inquiry. It really isn't. If this was a vexatious inquiry, if we were kind of just try and play fast and loose without much of an evidence base to work with, they wouldn't be doing this. They wouldn't have spent more than 18 months investigating it just to say nothing to see here. So we are confident that there will be substantial findings. We have worked with more than 70 whistleblowers to play their evidence in. One of the reasons we made the referral, I should have said in the first place, is so that the legal powers to break NDAs, so that people could safely whistleblow, were brought into effect by the involvement of the HRC at the level that it's been involved. And so, as a consequence, we are expecting, I would say, we're expecting findings of facts against that the Labour Party has broken the law. And we're also thinking that, and then that'll be accompanied by an improvement notice, our plan. And the question of how detailed the plan is, the question of what it says, is a moot point. We're not entirely sure. And the actually says a range of options there. They can be very specific, they can be very general. But they will be involved in monitoring that, and the party will have to come back and and make sure that it does what it's been told to do by the HRC.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for all the questions that are coming through so far. We'll get to them after we've got through this section, so keep them coming. Mike, do we know when the report will be out?
If I had a piece of string, I'd say, well, how long is this? we feel it's imminent, but you know, we have no more. We have no more knowledge than anybody else. There's a process of maximalisation where people that are organisations or individuals that have been mentioned in the report, criticised in the report particularly, are able to challenge to an extent correct fact, not correct judgment. This isn't about going back and Labour Party having an opportunity to say, actually, no, you got this all wrong. Honest gov. But there is that standard 20 under statute 28-day period of maximalisation, as it's called. So that will go through, and you know, we think it is going to land sometime soonish. That's why we are talking to groups like Open Labour. People have got a real vested interest in making sure that the people understand what the HRC report says and build on what it finds to improve the party for the best genuine reasons. That's why we're doing this. We could be waiting for some weeks more because the HRC just does it when it needs to do it. But we have indications that it's going to be soon. But you know, who knows?
Thank you. And can I ask, how does this relate to the two leaked dossiers that we've seen over the past year or so, both the JLM one just before Christmas, and then at Easter, the leaked Labour Party report?
So in reverse order, no, sorry, in the order that you said, the JLM one that was our final submission, and one of the tasks that we've had in pursuing this with the EHRC and indeed, you know, from working with them to an extent, is to actually kind of keep up with the pace of incidents and things that have been happening, and bring more evidence that to address, you know, what's happening whilst the HRC is reporting. So we made a initial submission which contained a lot of information, testimony from whistleblowers, some of which has been in the public domain, some of which hasn't, a lot of victim testimony as well, and legal arguments as to the different ways in which the equalities law, we felt equalities law have been breached. We then kind of wrapped that up, and we're, responding to a request to wrap that up with a closing submission. So that was something that took that obviously, you know, was around at the end of last year. It got leaked. It, in a sense, doesn't it help to underline the severity of the problem. If people have been following this, people have been looking at things like the Panorama documentary, as well as some of the reports and stuff that had got out in the papers. If people had actually kind of understood that the HRC was investigating full stop and taking up our reference, I think people wouldn't have been surprised at the weight and the tone of what had been revealed. The spooling forward to that leaked report, which had which came out shortly after Keir and Angela were elected, I think it doesn't, I mean, you know, without being able to speak with any kind of insight into whether it actually ever was meant to be a part of the Labour Party submission to the HRC, it wasn't written in the same way as, say, our final submission. It didn't feel like a document making legal arguments that you'd want it to make if you were a member of the party, or more to the point, a member of the party's trustees, i.e. the NEC. It felt more like I'd say a very long witness statement, justification for what had happened, very kind of clear political justification for what had happened. I mean, a couple of things on that. Obviously, there were masses of data breaches in the way it was written and then released. And that's very, you know, troubling, because, you know, some of our members' names ended up on neo-Nazi websites as a consequence of that process. Yeah, even to the extent that we were told that, you know, as soon as, you know, we wrote to the General Secretary saying, you know, we're really concerned about these data breaches. What are you going to do about it? You know, there's an ICO referral, and that letter got leaked. So what can you do? I think it. I think it. You know, there was one kernel of truth in it, which I think is important to dwell on. Is that actually it said, it's not that anti-Semitism wasn't a problem. It's just there was a problem in the way that different staff wanted to deal with it, and there was a political rationale behind that. Don't necessarily agree with that, really, but the fact that they said this is a problem, I think is significant, given kind of, I think everybody's political reading of who was writing that and who they were supporting and who they were kind of, would have previously might have said, well, actually, this isn't really a problem, or this is being weaponized. So I thought that was an important Rubicon to cross. There was some, I want to make clear right now that there was some absolutely disgusting language used about other BAME Labour members, BAME MPs in that report. Nothing that we say, nothing we want to do justifies it. We want to clean the party up for all minorities, to stamp out all forms of hatred that might exist in the party, and be properly committed to working for all minorities, supporting all people who are disadvantaged. By pursuing this, by rejecting that report, doesn't mean that we are endorsing the language that was used by some staff members according to that report. Be absolutely clear about that, and not getting into the kind of having any time for the idea that 2 and 2 equals 4. Absolutely not. But that report, I think, probably demonstrated beyond a doubt to the HRC that the governance of the party had severely failed. We'd been talking for a long time, as had other members of the NEC, to be fair. They've been asking to see Labour's original submission to the HRC, which nobody, and think about this, if anybody who's a trustee on a charity or is a local a councillor, if there is a major submission from your organisation to a major regulator of your organisation, you as a trustee don't get to see that, and you actually vote to not see it before even either before it's submitted or after it's submitted. It feels to me like a massive dereliction of duty, and the governance of the party is broken. And I think that report did help demonstrate that. A footnote, a legal footnote, but I think it's useful for people to know. There's something called a Section 23 agreement under the Equalities Act 2006, whereby an organisation can say, it's a fair cop, we agree with what you want to say in terms of your improvement notice, but we will work with you privately not to do that, to work with you privately to achieve that, rather, please, and rather than having a full publication. We think, and I think many around the leadership would agree with this, that would serve no purpose. They would still have to do the things that the HRC tell them they have to do, but there would be no demonstration of the findings of fact. And I think this has to be a big cathartic moment for the party. In my view, could be wrong, but in my view, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to hurt. It's going to show the party up in some very bad light, show some individuals potentially up in some very bad light, but nonetheless, the party needs to see it warts and all, so it can understand why it needs to change and how it needs to change. And so we are really hopeful that the party won't negotiate a Section 23. And I think that it's quite likely after that legal report that the HRC probably wouldn't offer it in the first place. But that's my speculation. For any lawyers out there, big caveat on that one. My speculation.
Really helpful to hear, Mike. And I totally agree that some of the behaviour in the leaked Labour Party report was absolutely appalling towards BAME MPs. I really hope that's fully investigated and action is taken, just as anti-Semitism needs to be investigated too. So this will be probably our final question before we go on to your questions, and that's, Mike, how do we expect the party to respond to the investigation, especially considering we have a new leader now and we're shortly going to have a new general secretary as well?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I can't cross you. Anything else?
No, that was it. That's good.
Well, look, we've heard some very positive noises from Keir and also from Angela from the get-go. And actually before that, during the leadership election, I think it's really significant that at a time when Keir was actually elected, COVID was at its real absolute apex. It would have been very easy to say, look, it's not that I don't think this is an important issue, but we've got a major public health crisis that's tearing across the country, and that's what our focus as a party of government, party that wants to be a party of government, has to be on. But he chose not to. He chose to make an apology to the Jewish community in his first actions, and to repeat that apology, and to make and to communicate with communal bodies, and to kind of step into that space in a way that we had consistently said. This requires leadership. It's about process, yes, and it's about procedures and policies, but it's about politics and it's about leadership. And we were constantly saying previously, certainly whilst we were still engaging with the party leadership, we're saying, you've got to. It can only come from one person. actually. It's got to be sincere, and it's really got to mean what it means. And you've got to take action, because words are great, but they've got to be followed by action. And we never, we had some words, but we never had action. We never had consequences, whether it's around people like Chris Williamson, or whether it was, lots of people signing a letter saying, Pete Wilsman still not being suspended, then unsuspended, and still a member of the party. It's like talking about, Trump, screaming Trump supporting rabbis, whatever greatest hits, the length of time it took to get Ken Livingstone out. Well, he left before we kicked him out. Ditto for Jackie Walker and Tony Greenstein. All these actions, he could have shown leadership, and he didn't. Now, Keir has shown some leadership, but the action's got to follow. I think the appointment of the new General Secretary is important, because one of the reasons that we stopped engaging, we'd stopped making complaints, because we had no confidence not only in the process, but in the people applying the process. And we have some very, very clear evidence that there was interference, both politically and also just some kind of very dodgy behaviour when it comes to taking care of members' personal data. But as a consequence, we need to see more actions. We need to see actions, I think, in terms of some significant staffing changes. We need some reform of the bits of the party that take care of these issues. We need more support for regional staff, because a lot of this happens on the ground, and there's a lot of it is about what happens in CLPs, and frankly, regional staff were never properly resourced or trained before there's any issue about politicization. We do need to see an independent process in some form that allows, that prevents any sort of political interference in a complaint against not just on anti-Semitism grounds, but the same conversation's been had around misogyny and other things like transphobia, I think. So there's a real need to reform the party from top to bottom. So what we're looking for from Keir and from Angela is when they receive the HRC report, some real definitive engagement with its recommendations, setting out how it's going to make the process independent. On the basis of that, we are keen to re-establish our training, our anti-Semitism awareness training with CLPs that we frankly were forced out of by Jenny Formby and the old leadership. We're very keen to start that again, but we need to see we need to see how the party's responding to what the HRC recommends. There's there's at the moment a fair degree of goodwill in the Jewish community that Keir has said what he meant and meant what he said, and he's travelling some real intent. But we're coming up to crunch time, and so what happens in terms of receiving the HRC report and the reaction to it, and actually the reaction to other people's reaction, to other parts of the movement's reaction to the report, will be immensely telling as well. And that's going to be really important, because I'm sure there'll be in parts of the party kickback, the same old denialism, the same old saying it's not a problem, the same old saying what about X, or what about Y, what about this party, or what about this minority, which isn't to say that some of what's being said isn't absolutely the case and absolutely true, but it doesn't, two wrongs don't make a right. We really need to see that action from Keir.
Thank you so much, Mike. And we're going to go on to your questions now, if that's all right with everyone. I'm going to take some of them out of the chat, but if you have a desire to read out your own question, please do let me know, and feel free to drop a message in the sidebar. So I'm going to start with a question from David Miller. How confident are we that the HRC will uphold the complaints? So do we think they'll uphold the complaint?
Well, there's two things, I think. Firstly, as I said, I think, there's a pretty high bar for the HRC to devote so much time and resource and energy to investigating a complaint of this nature. And it was done on the basis, really, of the submission that we made, because of the depth, the complexity, and the veracity, the sourcing of the evidence that we provided, meant that it couldn't be ignored. And for some people, as night follows day, if you have that much evidence, there is going to that you can build a case of illegal activity in the case of breaching equalities law, then it's going to follow there are going to be findings of facts. So I think, firstly, there's that element of they wouldn't be doing it if they thought this was just a shot in the dark and we were just being vexatious. Secondly, all I can say is the opinion of our lawyers who have got a lot of experience in this, and the views of other human rights lawyers who have seen what's been put out there, talked to us about this, commented not directly to us, but generally in social media, seems to be bang to rights. Now there's questions of degrees, but we could be wrong. This is all, to be very clear of everybody, this is all our presumptions, our experience, what we've picked up. Nobody knows. The HRC is a professional organisation. It's a massively important, well-respected. Well, I say well-respected. Most of the party, well-respected regulator, and as a consequence, it's going to do its job and find about fear or favour. But we're pretty confident it's going to find something and direct the party to do something. And I would say politically, it's really important that it does that, and it does that very clearly. And it gives Keir and the party and David Evans and the party a route map to get out of this place into a better place.
Definitely. Thanks, Mike. On to the next question, which is from Barnaby Marder. How confident are we, after the HRC recommendations have come out, that the party will work predominantly with JLM? And can I add to that, is the JLM currently working with the party, with the leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question, Barnaby. Thank you for that. We found that a big part of our struggle over the past few years was a kind of attempts to delegitimise us as a near 100-year-old affiliate of the party in a way that actually is so uncomradely, and you wouldn't get any trade union. You wouldn't suddenly find the Labour Party talking to a random union that's set up to represent bakers. They'll talk to the BFAWU, and because they're the affiliated party. Don't know where I got bakers from. Apologies, must still be hungry. But the point is, there was specifically, without going into their initials, there was an organisation that was basically established as a rehash and reheat of old organisation, the same few people, that was purporting to be, an alternative voice of Jewish authority. And people think what they think. People have their own views, but we feel we are representative of the views of Jewish progressives in the country. If you are left-wing and you're Jewish, you will have vaguely, not identical, but vaguely the same value set that we do. And yes, that includes being in the main side, being socialist Zionist, which means supporting the right of Israel to exist, massively critical of everything the current Israeli government is doing and indeed plans to do in short order. And we are fighting with other progressive organisations as hard as we can against that, and supporting the efforts of all Labour's representatives in fighting against that. But you can't represent the mainstream Jewish community in this country without having that Zionist value. Okay, it's 93% plus of Jewish people have that value, and the fact is that our rival organisation represented only themselves in as much as actors. They only represented few small people who are activists, rather than the thoughts of the left, on kind of the left of British Jewry. And this was let's be clear, this is an organisation that has always been active in the Labour Party, always felt that it was part of the Jewish community, very closely intertwined from when it was Parley Zion, as we used to be called, supporting the Labour candidate in the 1924 Whitechapel by-election, not the Jewish Liberal, but the Labour candidate, because they wanted some rights for their workers who were still working sweated trades in factories under appalling conditions. And as an example of our history, and we have been totally undermined by the determination of some people to kind of say, well, actually, no, we don't need to listen to just this group, there's another group. Sorry, I've been corrected. It's the 1930 Whitechapel by-election by our eminent historian. Thanks, Rebecca. There we go. But we are working with a party at the moment to an extent. We are working with, we've had contact with Lotto and with Angela's team. We are talking to them, but we are not re-engaging, because we have, once bitten, twice shy, and we're not re-engaging with the party in a formal sense until, certainly when David starts, and until we have to see a reaction to the HRC, and we can kind of, hopefully kind of embark on that roadmap. We really want to be part of this. Just going to how Miriam kicked off. We wanted to be a boring social society saying, what are our important policy issues? How can we create a fair economy? How can we have so strong, sustainable public services? How can we make sure there's international social justice? All these things that matter to us as Labour politicians, all these things that are so important. And we have spent, and if you told me that however many years ago, that I'd be spending the last 4 or 5 years talking pretty much about racism and that's it, I would have looked at you, A, like you need to go and lie down, and B, I would have been terribly, terribly sad, because that's not what the Labour Party, my Labour Party, is about. That's not what our values are about, and we need to get back to that campaigning. We will re-engage with the party when we see that they are serious about re-engaging with us and going the right way forward. But the signs are much better than they've been for a long time.
Well said, Mike. Absolutely. I wish we didn't have to talk about this so much, and sadly we do. We all want to see the Labour Party succeed and change our society for the better. So I'm very conscious that I'm reading out people's questions. So if you'd rather speak or say your question yourself, please do feel free to message me or put your hand up, and that's okay too. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Matt Carter, which is touching on something you said before, Mike. So on top of the recommendations in the EHRC, what do you think you'd like to see the party do to eradicate anti-Semitism? And
so
its relation with the Jewish community as well.
Yeah. So look, I've already talked about some of this stuff. I think an independent process is really important, because it's just it's just broken now, and it has no credit. It has no credibility in not just our eyes, but in the eyes of the Jewish community. And despite the figures that were produced at regular intervals by Jenny Formby, by the Labour Party, it was just clear that the experience of people was that you complained and nothing happened. People weren't chucked out. You couldn't understand what had happened to cases. As a victim, actually, as a victim of in any sort of complaint about bullying or harassment, whatever it was, you had lousy care, lousy attention, no sort of kind of contract with you as a member that had been wronged. All the communication was with the person who had been complained against. And the lack of political will that was demonstrated by some of those high profile cases that I've already mentioned, not being tackled, really kind of full stop, or taking years to run through, demonstrated that the process was broken. And it's very clear that there was there was a political project to protect allies who otherwise wouldn't be members of the Labour Party. They were kept in, and the rules were used to keep them in, because they were fellow travellers, they were long-term supporters, and they're important to the project of keeping the party together, rather than what should be the Labour Party's values of chucking out people who don't have Labour values, probably have only never used to call the Labour Party their political home, and really shouldn't be members. So that's important. Long way of answering. Short answer is an independent process. I think as well it's about culture change and leadership, and sometimes that means taking some tough decisions on and making examples of people. But we shall see the reaction to the report that I've referred to before, in terms of how some people might want to trade in denialism and say, this is all cooked up, and find some reasons for why the HRC isn't fit and proper as an organisation to do its job and make the recommendations that it does, and how the party reacts to that, and what the party does with individuals, if heaven forfend there are parliamentarians making that argument, what the party does with that, and how the party does a better job of sending a signal that everybody should find Labour Party meetings a warm, safe, inclusive, welcoming space. And if you're in the business of stopping that happening, you have no business of being a Labour Party member. And again, this isn't just speaking as a Jew. I know Miriam, you, Rebecca, others, lots of Labour women, not just the big names like Margaret. Sorry, not just kind of the MPs like Margaret. You're a huge name, like Margaret and Luciana and Louise and Ruth. But women have always suffered the worst of this, the misogyny, both offline, but particularly online. And there's an intersectionality there, and I'm sure there's other intersectionalities. But the Labour Party should be a nice place to be. I used to quite enjoy going to meetings. I don't anymore. We need to get back to that. So that's about how you can change the culture of the party, and how you can do that through leadership and through saying we don't put up with this behaviour. We can't tolerate this just because you stay within. You're there to argue a motion at a GC doesn't mean that you can be hateful in the way that you do that.
Thank you so much, Mike, and feel free to keep questions coming as well. On the note of denialism, I'm going to pass over to Liz for her question.
Oh.
Hi, yeah. So I've read quite big chunks of the leaked report, but one part that I just particularly searched for was the question of denialism. I've got a lot to say about anti-Semitism, but I don't want to take everyone's time up. But it seems to me that on page 774, there's a whole section on denialism that basically encapsulates my thinking that I've independently developed about the denier culture. And it signposts quite clearly to the denial culture being wrong and calling it out. And it also kind of couches it in that because of the sort of factional purges that happened, and you can say whether it was wrong or it was right for around entryism in 2015 for there to have been what they call witch hunts or purges or whatever of members trying to join. But that sort of appeal, I think, I think if you could count the concept that denialism has arisen on the left of the party because as a response to what they would term as the sort of witch hunts around entryism, then I think perhaps that just sort of brings everybody in a bit closer, because we're not just saying to them, you're deniers and it's your fault because you're anti-Semitic and there's something wrong with you. We're saying you're deniers and it's a natural, if you like, response to something that you experienced negatively. And so perhaps if we can make more of the fact that this denialism part is couched there in the report, I feel like we perhaps could get a bit of consensus going between the different factions of the party.
Thanks, Liz. I'm afraid I don't know the leaked report that well, so I will take your word on the reference. I understand the premise of the question. I understand where you're coming from. I guess to my mind, the issue is, and this kind of does lead into anti-Semitism and in a sense the peculiarities of anti-Semitism and the way bits of the left have always interacted with anti-Semitism, and the fact it is a punching up racism as well as a punching down racism, i.e., it's about a lot of racism is around kind of saying that about white superiority to minorities, whereas this is about actually not. There's an element of that, and there always has been when it comes to Jews, but there's also an element of they're shadowy, they're controlling everybody, and they're kind of actually superior to us, and we need to fight against that. And that's what's kind of visited in some of the tropes, and that's why kind of people have, since was it Bebel, I think, in 1890s in Germany, coined the phrase "the socialism of fools." That there was always a good excuse for why socialism wasn't quite working, and it ended up being in a caricature looking like a Jew. To give it a very, very short pen portrait. So it isn't that I understand why people would have a reaction to some of those that activity if they thought that was going on and there was a political act and there was injustice around it. At the same time, there are people who took a very conscious choice to say, we're not going to believe a variety of people who don't have any skin in the game other than to say there's I've had a racist act, an anti-Semitic act committed against me. I have witnessed anti-Semitism. I've been discriminated against. And there are people, and I'm not saying, part of what we are doing is not saying the Labour Party is rotten, or however many 100,000 members, but there was definitely a part of the party, and there were people in the party who definitely took that tone, that they used it. There was not a moment's consideration that there might be validity to the claims. And that's the denialism that I'm talking about, in a way that I would say most other Labour Party members it would not enter their heads to treat somebody who was talking about Islamophobia or anti-black racism or homophobia or transphobia or anything like that. And there seemed to be an exceptionality to that. I think I saw Barnaby posting up in the chat a reference to one of Keith Harris's pieces. I would recommend you checking Keith's work out. He's got some very interesting things to say about the way the left deals with anti-Semitism and the way it has regard to other forms of racism and the way it doesn't quite fit into the box. I won't try and press Keith's work here because he's a far brighter guy than I am, but it's worth you taking the reference from the chat box and reading some of his pieces, because he's got some really interesting insights into the way the left behaves. And it's not a phenomenon that's just restricted to the Labour Party in the UK. It's a phenomenon that you see across Europe, indeed across the world.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to really quickly do a round of 3 questions, and then I'll let people come in if that's okay. So, because we've had quite a few questions come in. I'm so sorry. So in this round, we're going to have Henry first, then Pani, and then Tom. Tom, I've messaged you privately. If you'd like to read out the question yourself, that's totally fine, but I'm happy to read it for you. So first, Henry, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me? Perfect.
Yep.
So my question, Mike, is whether or not some of Keir Starmer's language around having a line of sight over complaints, whether a line of sight over the issue of anti-Semitism, whether or not that worries you at all. I don't think that many of us doubt that Keir is behaving in good faith with regards to the issue of anti-Semitism, but talk of having a line of sight, I think, personally for me at least, raises some alarm bells, because I think that it can be all too easy, even if he believes he's acting in good faith, that having a line of sight could lead to some kind of political interference.
Cool. Thank you.
Pani, would you like to say your question?
Firstly, thank you for organising this and giving the talk. I'm pretty fortunate in that, as an Open Labour member, as a Ealing Labour member rather, we've got a strong Jewish voice in the form of Peter Mason. How do you think we can best convince other strong Jewish members who left the party, like Luciana Berger, to rejoin? And because I do not think that our work against anti-Semitism will be completed until those members who left feel safe enough to rejoin.
Yeah, and Tom, are you okay to ask your question? And then we'll go back to Mike to answer the round.
Yeah, thanks for that. I wanted to know, how can I support the JLM within my CLP, because we have a few members who support Jo Berg because she is from the neighbouring CLP. So we have a few members support that, and that came up particularly heavily during the NEC election when she was temporarily suspended, then unsuspended. And is there a motion or something I can present, some way that I can promote education to my CLP? Because I don't think they are, in with the anti-Semitic gang or the cranks, but they can easily fall into that conspiracy theory. And I'd like to try and say to some of these members, no, that isn't the way to go, if that's possible.
Great, thanks. Fantastic questions, everybody. I'm going to try and rip through them quickly so I can do some more. Henry, I know what you mean, and I think it's important that we're all alive to it. I know this sounds like I'm just going to pick this name off the floor, but having had a conversation with him on this at the end of last week, Keir understands the difference between having line of sight that there is progress on cases as a quantum, and understanding what that is and the fact that there is progress being made and being able to make interventions to judge that, and having it in his line of sight is different from saying you've suspended the wrong man. Can you unsuspend him, please? Because when we said for you to randomly suspend some people over this, over whatever, then this is this was you picked the wrong one. He's a pal. To caricature it heavily, but that's what happened. That's what political interference means: interfering in the outcomes of individual complaints against other individuals, rather than saying, I'm managing this organization. Ultimately, the buck stops with me, in a political sense, and so I have to know that this stuff is being managed properly. And through the paid officer structure of the party, general secretary downwards, I need you to be telling me, and I need to have confidence in the data you're giving me, and you're giving me the right data that I need to know to understand the size of the problem. The data you're giving me is accurate, and you're going to brief me when there is something that's politically sensitive going to happen, so we can turn around and deal with that appropriately. I think it's important to know. I completely agree with that, with your reservations. He ran a big organisation, and I think that's pretty unique actually in terms of party leaders. So I have some confidence that he can kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. Pani, this is the heart of it. We have to demonstrate change and a commitment to change. I want Louise Ellman to be back in the party. Yeah, I think that's really, really clear. I think Keir wants Louise Ellman to be back in the party, but I would, without kind of telling out any secrets or giving any kind of insight, I would suspect Louise understands that, as much as there's been some good, strong words and positive intent shown so far, we're not there yet. So I think it is actually about saying, where I suppose in the micro level, where that there are people in your community, on your street, in your local area who are Jewish and did leave, then say, please reconsider joining, because I think we're doing this. I would also say, please consider joining JLM as a way of kind of staying half in the party but half out if you're not ready to do that yet, to fully join the party. But it has to be about a process of time and healing to show that we are actually making the changes that will inspire confidence. It's kind of going to have to be organic. Tom, how can I support JLM? I wish we were in a stage where we could get back to delivering the anti-Semitism awareness training that we used to do, that we used to deliver, because one of the key things is get us in to do that. And please God, at some point in time in the not too distant future, we may be at that place. We're not there yet. And that's important, because I think you're right. There are lots of people who are kind of acting out of ignorance rather than out of malevolence. But at the same time, there's certainly when meetings are happening again, I think really important to show solidarity to Jewish members who are there, to kind of help them speak up against anti-Semitism if it's happening in their presence, or if it's happening in their community. I think there's definitely for CLP, for councillors and MPs, if you where you've got them, to build links with local Jewish community organisations and to show some understanding of why that could be difficult, but to put out our hand and say, we are getting there, we want to do better than we have done, can we start having a conversation with you? I think those are kind of some, thinking about ways you can interact with the Jewish community as well as interact with your Jewish members as a way of supporting the actions that we're taking. I think we're sort of a bit beyond motions, although we have always in the past had kind of motions that can go to GC to say we support. But I think we're always, I put it this way, I think we'll always like to see CLP supporting us and encouraging other members that to join us, because the more resource, the more we can say to be speaking for a sizable chunk of the party, the more authority we carry in helping Keir deliver what we think he needs to deliver. So join up, get other people to join up and show support of Jewish comrades when they feel they're under attack.
Great. We're going to take another round of questions. We've got 14 minutes left, so if I could ask question askers to be as quick as possible, and then hopefully we can rattle through a few more questions as well. So first I'm going to go to Jonathan, and then Liz, and then Paul. So first over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Miriam. Can everybody hear me? Is that enough? Good. So my concern is that we need to be able to counter the arguments we get when we start educating, that by us stating, as Mike did earlier, that we are Zionists, that the response often comes back, well, that means that you support Netanyahu and you support annexation. It's clearly not true, but what happens is that almost you get a torrent of abuse coming back at you. And if it's one or two people constantly going back and arguing that, those of us that do that get labelled as cranks. So, for example, in Leeds, where I live, we have a cross CLP Facebook page, and that kind of thing is happening pretty much constantly. And it's maybe one or two of us countering it. So I would like to say, are we going to get some kind of national support to do that? To counter those kind of things, to explain that by being Labour Zionists, we actually want a Labour government and left government in Israel. Are we going to get some support from Keir as that goes down as well? What's going to happen to help us educate more locally and to stop us being labelled as just the local noisy, cranky Jews, which is what often happens?
Liz, back to you quickly. Liz, do you still want to ask? Oh, no worries. I can take you off mute.
Sorry, yeah. Just to come back, so I agree with everything Mike said about denialism and why it's anti-Semitic. But just, I wanted to bring it back to my original point, which was that when I read large chunks of the leaked report, what it struck me that the nugget actually of the report was that what they were saying was that in its original form back in 2015, there was a lot of entryism, and we had, really anti-Semitic stuff about Rothschild's conspiracies and stuff like that. And they dealt with that and they kind of got on top of it. And then because of, whatever, organic anti-Semitism, that's just casual anti-Semitism among the members, or as a response to this experience of feeling that there was a conspiracy because of what was done by the party, that fostered this denier narrative on the left. And they specifically say in the report that this denialism is basically the big problem of anti-Semitism in the party now, and the conspiracy. And so it seems to me that this is the report which the left have seized upon, that is saying that we've got a conspiracy denialism problem. And it just seems to me that seems like a vehicle to say to them, look, okay, denialism, even your own report is telling you that the denialism isn't fake, the denialism is real, and here's a reason that you can accept that, because it wasn't, necessarily that you were a horrible person in the first place. It was because, perhaps because of a conspiracy theory that you have adopted for a valid reason. And it just seemed like a way, if we can seize on that, look, even the report that you think vindicates you is telling you that denierism is real and is currently a big part of the problem. It seems like we could perhaps use that to get the left to acknowledge some of the problems that they're coming up with.
Thank you, Liz. Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, my question is around training as well. Just in the context of what's your views, Mike, regarding whether it should be mandatory or not for CLPs? And further to that, whether it is mandatory or not, how do you go about tackling certain members that are obviously going to be in CLPs across the country who will be actively trying to discourage attendance at any training you might want to hold?
To you, Mike.
Okay, let's go reverse order. Mandatory training, it's a big ask resource-wise, is what I'll say. But I mean, I think in a sense, it's sort of what's needed in a way where in a place where lots of people, I think, are just kind of not necessarily freighting huge anti-Semitic tropes, but they're just quite confused about what's happening and why it's happening. We were always really concerned, to kind of speak slightly around this. We're always really concerned that there was an attempt, or there was a rationale by which you could use training, a bit like one of those, do a speeding course as an alternative to getting points on your license. Does that mean you will never speed again? Doubt it very much. And that actually training was somehow used as an alternative to a proper sanction when somebody should have been suspended or expelled from the party. And yeah, that concern still exists, that ultimately that you have to make kind of hard decisions about whether people share share values that we would kind of the majority of Labour members would sign up to or not. And I think there is always a danger in just saying we can do the job purely by making sure that everybody reads this piece of paper and signs it, because that clearly won't solve the problem. But I think in terms of trying to roll out positive education to as many members as possible in as many different formats as possible, where we say JLM are kind of focused at the heart of that effort. Yeah, absolutely. Liz, on kind of going back to denialism, I understand where you are coming from, but I worry that it lets people off the hook for not understanding the nature of the problem. And I understand you're saying the Leak report, in a sense, is a MacGuffin for drawing people into a conversation. And maybe you're right, because after all, to the extent it says, look, anti-Semitism was definitely a problem, that was positive. But I sort of hope that some of the force of that report will be trumped by the force of what's in the HRC report, and that will kind of, give a very objective view as to why those who kind of were constantly denying the fact there was a problem were very wrong and really need to take a long, hard look at themselves in the mirror. Jonathan, around arguments around Israel and Zionism, yeah, that's part of that's part of education, and I think ultimately, if they're the party signing up to IHRA as a definition, means that you have to. There's a point at which intolerance of you making the arguments that you're talking about making. There's a point at which you can't put up with people kind of not respecting your perspective and not respecting the kind of the not exactly nuance, but the fact of your political position. So as a consequence, it does mean that if people, again, it's about being tough and understanding what the rules of engagement are for everybody. And you shouldn't have to put up with having to defend those values because you're making it clear that supporting the right of Jewish self-determination is a million miles away from supporting the actions of a right-wing government in Israel that seems bent on destroying any hope for a two-state peaceful solution to the crisis. So that's in nobody's interest. Unless people don't respect your position, that it's their problem, not yours.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll probably move over to summing up. So Stephen, you had a question to ask about training, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, it was the question about mandatory training, and I followed up with the comment in the chat. I think it's really important that if we're going to tackle this issue and remove, not the excuses, because in my experience, some members genuinely don't understand anti-Semitism in any depth, and therefore leave themselves open to making inappropriate comments which are anti-Semitic or perceived as such. So I really think, because it's such a serious issue, every single member of the party should be required to carry out mandatory training, not necessarily attending one event like the one I did, which was very good, but online training, maybe something similar to what we're doing now. But having joined the party, or from a given date, you have 6 months, 12 months, whatever is decided, to complete that training. I'd say, as I said in the chat, I'd say the same for other really important areas, like you talked about transphobia, misogyny, etc. It's the same what anybody does in any organization these days. As a teacher, I have to complete safeguarding training, for example. And that's checked digitally to make sure I've read the required literature and completed the required training, perhaps with a quiz to assess my knowledge. Once that's done, and if it's good training, nobody has an excuse moving forward in terms of what they say or do. And so, it certainly shouldn't be used as do this training and we won't suspend you or we won't kick you out. People, once they've done that training, if it's good training, no longer have an excuse.
Back to you, Mike. And if you're okay to sum up as well, if you have any.
Yeah,
to say as well.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the direction of your comments. I guess the point is that really, in a sense, we should be in a position whereby you shouldn't have to kind of say everybody has to be trained. If you're a Labour Party member, you should have to be trained not to be a massive racist or misogynist or homophobe. It should be freighted in our values, and that's the kind of the problem with kind of wider political education, and the fact that as I would say, the fact we've had a kind of a change in who was interested in joining the Labour Party, who suddenly thought the Labour Party was their natural political home in a way they hadn't for previously. So, prior to 2015, thought that was the case for quite a long time. And I think, I don't disagree, but with the idea that everybody should have training. I think, there's obviously large resource implications. I think there are ways of doing it, but I think at the same time, it's about people living their values rather than just being able to sign something as they've done it. And the issue of all safeguarding practices, obviously, is the fact that it's only when they're breached do you realise the training hasn't been effective, or it hasn't been inculcated properly, or hasn't been spread culturally across an organisation. And obviously, sometimes with some very tragic consequences. So it's about the way that the culture is spread across the organisation, as much as making sure that everybody goes through the same training. Because I don't want to sound negative about that, but I think it's about people being responsible around their having responsibility for their own behaviour. And I'd love JLM to be back talking to people about anti-Semitism awareness and talking about Jewish identity and talking about the way that intersects with other minority identities and how that intersects with the Jewish left intersects with the rest of the community, and how things are developed. We had a really, sort of by way of summary, we had a fantastic, I don't know if anybody caught it, I think this live stream is still up on Facebook. This is going to be up on Facebook. We had a fantastic discussion last night on Black Lives Matter and the interaction, what the experience of for Black British Jews and Jews of colour, and the way that the British Jewish left can show solidarity and support to those experiencing anti-Black racism. And in a sense, this it made me think, fundamentally, our referral is about our ability and a right to assert our political rights in a way that we fought as a community long and hard to do in the around about 100 years ago, in a way that those other communities are now still having to fight to assert their rights and their civic rights, their political rights, their rights as equal members of society. And it follows naturally that we stand shoulder to shoulder with all those people in doing that, because ultimately, this is about not having a hierarchy of racism, not having exceptionalism, not having any tolerance for any sort of discrimination. And it's a sad fact that, bear in mind that we, as a largely migrant community, practically I think the first ever piece of anti-migrant legislation was the 1905 Aliens Act. So I think I've got that date right, Rebecca. The 1905 Aliens Act, which was specifically designed to stop Jews from the Pale of Settlement, as they called it, immigrating into, to Britain. And, so we're strongly in that tradition. And the idea that that we've had to go through the process and the political distancing, whereby we have to make a submission to the Equalities Watchdog that Labour set up in government to demonstrate that the Labour Party wasn't doing right by a minority community who were members of a minority community in its membership, and that remedy is going to look quite painful, I think, to the party. It's going to look like, you know, the party is seriously taking its eye off the ball, seriously not lived values that we would have thought were, you know, just second nature to people who are left of centre, indeed, however you want to describe yourself. And that is why this referral, and when it comes in terms of the inquiry report and its recommendations, is going to be, I think, you know, quite traumatic, but potentially cathartic and a healing experience in the long term for the party. I'd like to think we can all look back on this and say, that was an aberration. We won't go through this again, but we must work to safeguard that we don't do this, but also promote the rights of other minority communities, both within the party and in wider society, because that's why we're all Labour Party members. And you know, somewhere along the way over the last 4 or 5 years, we lost that thread, and we need to regain it. So that's what that's what hopefully the report will bring.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was really interesting and useful to hear. And I'm going to pass over to Alex in a second, but I wanted to first say a massive thank you to Open Labour and Open Labour Committee for all the fantastic work that they do. And thank you so much to everyone who sent in wonderful questions as well. Like, it's been really great to hear from you. Alex, I'm going to pass on to you if that's all right.
Thanks, Miriam. You know, I'd like first of all thank Miriam for stepping in, who's done such a lot of work on this, and I know has had such terrible abuse online, particularly, as well as lots of other people in the JLM. And you know, here in Open Labour, I know Miriam's an Open Labour member, and Mike, you know, we're standing shoulder to shoulder with you. You know, a lot of our members in Open Labour are Jewish, are JLM members, and are not Jewish, and also JLM members. So, you know, there's a big overlap between our two memberships. And just to thank you both, Miriam and Mike, for this evening. And just to say, you know, Open Labour, we're going to our election at the moment. I know there's people on the call who aren't members and watching on YouTube who aren't members. You can still join until the 3rd of July and take part in our elections, take part in more Zoom events like this that we've got coming up. So this week we've got our quiz on a Friday night, which obviously excludes some people, so apologies for that. And then on Saturday night, the Northwest have got an event around local government in Northwest, which is their second event, which we're hosting nationally, and has Open Labour's former co-chair, Councillor Bev Craig, who's on the executive of Manchester Council, Matthew Brown, who's the leader of Preston Council, and it's chaired by Marcus Johns, who's a Manchester Council and Open Labour member. And other councils are going to be added to that as well, I know. And so we've got an exciting programme coming up. We're going to try and keep interesting topics on the agenda. We've had a good set of foreign policy events, including actually on annexation with Yahad and people from Palestinian Authority involved in that as well, which I think really reflects actually the views of JLM as well as of Open Labour on annexation. We're looking at other issues like Hungary, again, a huge issue around anti-Semitism in Hungary, and other issues around human rights and their place in the EU, and China, where there are issues around anti-Muslim racism and real oppression of the Uyghur community. So we're trying to take on some of the difficult topics globally as well as the domestic topics here. So please do join Open Labour and do come to our Zoom events or watch them on YouTube. And thank everybody, and thank Miriam and Mike again for tonight. Thank you.